23rd day, Upper Wind Month, 1 CE. Their ship came out of a narrow canyon with towering walls and intermittent falls into a long highland vale. Though they weren't as tall as the Azalisia Mountains, the peaks nearby were still high enough to be laced with snow well into spring. In the distance, a massif crowned in ice dominated the landscape. Nemel gaped at the majestic scenery, as did her friends and the rest of the newcomers to Warden's Vale. Though she had asked to be woken when they arrived, Dame Verilyn had already roused from her nap. The frost dragon's turquoise eyes darted back and forth as she scrutinized the cliffs to their east. "Is something the matter?" Nemel asked. "There are dangerous fellows in the mountains here," Dame Verilyn answered. Dangerous? To someone as powerful as Dame Verilyn? She could only think of a handful of races that could contend with dragonkind. "Are there giant tribes here, too?" "No," Dame Verilyn's gaze didn't leave the cliffs. "There are sheep." "Sheep? Oh, yes. Terrible, ornery sheep. You had better tell your minions not to mess with them or I'm afraid we'll all be doomed." She didn't sound like she was joking. Actually, Dame Verilyn didn't joke much. Be it weird, horrifying, funny or sad, what she said was nearly always serious. "What do they look like?" "About a meter long, with white, fluffy wool. They have hooved hind legs, but their front legs have 2 hooved fingers and a thumb. They have 2 eyes like sheep and 1 eye on their forehead that looks up at the sky. The males have antlers like deer. They can fly, too." They sounded less and less like sheep the further along the description went. Nemel eyed the cliffs alongside Dame Verilyn. "Are they aggressive?" "When they attack people, they do it as a herd. Imagine a swarm of flying sheep chasing you around casting all sorts of spells. I have no idea why, but they don't seem to like dragons much." Nemel swallowed. How could anyone survive that? "What do they eat?" "Lichen and moss." "That's terry weight, moss. As in the green stuff that grows on rocks and tree trunks?" "The very same. It's unfair, really. There's so much of it in these mountains. That means there are so many of those evil little sheep. They lurk in their high mountain valleys, watching the world. I bet they're plotting something." It sounded like they were just minding their own business to her. Still, it was probably a good idea to warn her rangers. New migrants getting killed by sheep wouldn't be good publicity for Nemel's placement agency in our winter. "Are there any other dangerous things out there?" Nemel asked. "Not that I know of," Dame Verilyn answered. "Everything else I've seen out here seems reasonably safe." The huge mountain in the south loomed closer as the barge sped its way upstream. Less than 2 hours from the time they left the canyon, they came around a bend in the river with the granite cliffs of an island on its western shore. Nemel couldn't see what was on top of it. Eventually, they came into a long harborfront lined with berths that looked much like the locks in Corlin Harbor. "Is this it?" Nemel asked. "Baroness Zaradnik's capital, I mean." "It is." Dame Verilyn rose to her feet and stretched her wings. "You'll be unloading your things here. Lady Zaradnik has arranged for a dedicated transport between here and my territory." A long row of warehouses came into view as the lock raised the barge to harbor level. To Nemel's surprise, they found Lady Zaradnik waiting for them alongside the berth. With her were 2 undead, an elder lich and a tiny skeleton that stood about as tall as her waist. "Welcome to Warden's Vale," Lady Zaradnik smiled. "It's good to see all of you again." Nemel lowered her head in a curtsy. "Thank you for your welcome, my lady. We're excited to be here." The Baroness introduced them to Nonna, her right-hand elder lich. The skeleton's name was Jeeves. He served as the harbor master of Warden's Vale. "Dame Verilyn may have informed you already," Lady Zaradnik said, "but I've arranged for transport between the harbor and your new home." She gestured to the berth next to them, where a wooden sailing vessel awaited them. Like the barge, it appeared to be operated by one of the undead. It was one of the death warriors that uncommonly appeared in the Sorceress Kingdom's patrols. A row of skeleton warriors stood in a row behind it. "The captain here is probably the most experienced undead sailor in the Sorceress Kingdom," the Baroness told her. "It has been plying the river for over a year now, so you and your people will be in good hands." The death warrior raised its broad hat in greeting. It directed the skeletons to help unload their cargo. "Your people can hold on to their personal belongings," Lady Zaradnik said. "The captain will load the vessel with your supplies. Once your people are ready, please come with me." "We're not going straight to the territory?" Nemel asked. We are, the Baroness replied, but the Nar can't carry all of your cargo and people at once. We'll be riding wagons south to a point across from Dame Verelin's territory. Is there anything you need from here, by the way? I think we have everything, my lady, Nemel said. Is there anything we might not have considered? Lady Zaradnik turned her head to look up at the snowbound mountains south of the harbor. From a distance, Nemel thought it was just a towering peak far to the south. Now that they were much closer, Nemel realized that its wintry slopes were strangely out of place. It's still chilly in the highlands at this time of year, the Baroness said. Dame Verelin's territory is even more so. Well, you can always come back for more supplies here if you need them. They were led south to where several soul eaters awaited with their wagons. Once everyone boarded their respective vehicles, they headed further west into the island. Dame Verelin flew off ahead of them. So, Lady Zaradnik said, how was the rest of your trip around the Empire? It was eventful. Nemel replied, things were going well until everyone got kidnapped by ninjas. Then Lady Shiltia came and kidnapped the ninjas. We eventually arrived in our winter and my parents were very supportive of my move. I'm not sure what that whole ninja part is about, Lady Zaradnik said, but we did get some a while ago. I'm happy to hear that your family is behind your decision. Oh, they are, my lady, Nemel nodded. As you can see, they even helped me get some people together. They're all spares from Grand Barony. The Baroness glanced over her shoulder at the wagons trailing behind them. I was wondering where they came from. Getting people out here is probably the hardest part of territorial development. My parents came up with a clever scheme, Nemel said. They've opened an office to bring spares from the Empire to Dame Verelin's territory. Really, now? Lady Zaradnik turned to regard her with interest. Yes, my lady. This group here is only about a third of what I've secured so far. Once enough land is cleared, we'll bring in people to build homes. Then we'll bring in farmers and other professions that will support the new industries in the territory. Was it hard to convince them to come? My house has a good reputation and our subjects like us, so it didn't take much convincing. We've even lined up apprentices in training to come here once they've become journeymen. Lady Zaradnik crossed her arms, cradling her chin between her thumb and forefinger. Now I'm getting jealous. I've been relying on the temples to send what few people were willing to come all this time. Do you plan on making this office a permanent thing? We're still working out the details, my lady, Nemel replied. It's easy to get spares from tenants working in primary industries, but trying to draw magic casters and the like from the Empire is next to impossible. Tell her about the thing, Fendrose whispered from behind her. The thing? Lady Zaradnik asked. Fendrose has a talent, Nemel answered. An eye talent. She can detect the magic power in people. The Baroness looked past Nemel to Fendrose. Did the Empire know about this before your house was attainted? Yes, my lady, Fendrose said. But once a house is attainted, it's hard to become anything of note in the Empire. Not that my talent is very reliable. Don't let that fool you, my lady, Elise piped up. It's true that Ray's talent is pretty random, but it doesn't lie. Once she spots someone with magic power, it's a sure thing. If you stick her in a plaza and have her look around all day, she'll be bound to find a few people. If she teaches classes as you've asked her to, my lady, Ida added, she'll be exposed to the same children every day. Her talent is bound to detect anyone with magical capability over a few months. Fendrose turned her gaze downward and twiddled her thumbs. I don't want to get your hopes up, my lady, she said. I haven't had a chance to use it as they've described, so I don't know how well things will work out. I'll be more than happy to give it a thorough assessment, Lady Zaradnik said. I understand that the Empire tends to focus on what they consider geniuses, but my goal is to raise a large population of magic casters. The vast majority of civilian applications for magic do not require heroes and legends. Even if they can only grasp third-tier spells, they are more than welcome here. She made it sound as if third-tier casters were common. Those who achieved it early were hailed as the so-called geniuses Lady Zaradnik referred to, while anyone else who managed to reach the third tier of magic only did so in the prime of their long careers. Their wagon turned south at an empty intersection and headed towards a large hill with several buildings at its base. On their right was a complex that looked like a small army base. Nemel caught glimpses of Death Series servitors drilling and sparring in the fields between the buildings. This is the headquarters for the Sorceress Kingdom's Southwest Army Group, the Baroness told them. It's also known as the Second Army Group. I didn't know Warden's Vale was also a military base, Nemel said. But I suppose you don't receive many economic benefits for a base filled with undead. Lady Zaradnik snorted and smirked. Well, we do get funding for the construction of military facilities and their maintenance, but you're right about the usual economic benefits. A living army would require an extensive framework of industries to support it and the population working in those industries. There will be living members of the army stationed here at some point, but the vast majority of industries supporting this base will revolve around the production of consumables and magic items. The wagon turned left at the next intersection. They passed another complex. This one was just as grey and ubiquitous as the army base, but it had a sense of being lived in. This is the Faculty of Alchemy, Lady Zaradnik said. Well, it's also the Faculty of Artifice for now. You have a university here? It's part business, part educational institution. Since my goal is to have a high percentage of magic casters in my population, I also need the educational infrastructure for that population and the industries to employ those educated magic casters. In a few generations, I hope that the city here will become known as a thriving center for both arcane and divine magic. Now that the Baroness mentioned it, Nemel hadn't noticed any institutions for arcane casters in the Sorceress Kingdom at all. There were plenty of elder liches going about, but the Duchy of Irantal was as one would expect of a former territory of the magically illiterate Riestais. They turned at another intersection in front of a forge complex, heading south along a rocky stretch of land that ran parallel to a huge stone dam. A giant mill rested atop the outlet pipe. Nemel could only imagine how much work could be done with all that water. I believe that you'll be exporting timber for most of your first year here, Lady Zaradnik said. The people that purchase it from you will process it into lumber at that mill you see there. The lumber is then seasoned at the yards in the harbor. How do trade taxes work? Nemel asked. Elder liches work as tax officials, but we do eventually plan on having humans also working for the department, as you've probably seen in Irantal. You can see Jeeves at the harbor master's office to settle everything related to harbor operations. They entered the canyon at the southern end of Warden's Vale, speeding along a paved highway one wouldn't expect to find in the wilderness. After following the river for the better part of an hour, the wagon slowed and stopped at a wide bend where a tributary joined the Katza River from the east. Several islands dotted the water. The far shore was covered in snow. Nemel looked to the ground at her feet. The knee-high grass had long turned green. I haven't gone crazy, have I? No, Lady Zaradnik told her. The territory that Dame Verilyn has tasked you to manage is across the river. Dame Verilyn settled on the ground nearby. Nemel ran over in a panic. Your land is frozen, she cried. It is, Dame Verilyn agreed, her tail sinuously moving about in content. Isn't it wonderful? It's not. The villages won't work like this. The frost dragon's tail froze. Her toothy maw loomed close. Does that mean I won't get my taxes? Her voice grew distraught. Have you been stringing me along with lies this entire time? To think that I trusted you. I didn't lie to you, Nemel replied. I just thought the climate would be like every other place in the region. We can't grow potatoes like this. Grow this, grow that. Dame Verilyn's voice turned sour. You humans are needlessly bound by your silly conventions. Can you not just hunt potatoes instead? Hunt potatoes? Nemel tried to imagine what that would be like. What tools would they need? Would the potatoes fight back? The mental imagery grew more terrifying by the second. Potatoes are harvested from plants, Lady Zaradnik said. Plants can be heteromorphs, Dame Verilyn said back. The Baroness rolled her eyes. As I mentioned the last time we met, she told Nemel, Dame Verilyn will be relying on you for many things. Don't be afraid to speak your mind and help her understand what needs to be done. We'll do our best, my lady. Nemel lowered her head, but I don't think we can do anything about that snow. Lady Zaradnik gave Dame Verilyn a look. Stop snowing, she said. What? It wouldn't be a proper frost dragon domain without snow. You're overdoing it. I know you're proud of your new domain, but even the Azalisia Mountains are only frozen year-round above a certain altitude. You've frozen things all the way down to the river. Dame Verilyn looked up at her mountain, a low rumble issuing from her throat. Nemel's migrants scurried away. 2/3, the Frost Dragon said. The tree line, Lady Zaradnik replied. The tree, Dame Verilyn spluttered, but that's only the top fifth. You said that there will be glaciers, so those will flow down further than that. As it is, you're going to block the river and flood the upper reaches. If that's your concern, then I'll adjust things seasonally. It will melt up to the top fifth by the height of summer and snow down to the river by the middle of winter. Lady Zaradnik crossed her arms, twisting her lip. I'm fine with that, but keep in mind that your incomes will be affected by this. What do I do, Miss Gran? I think you should do what you think is acceptable to you, Dame Verilyn. It's your domain, after all. As Lady Zaradnik mentioned, however, the shorter the growing season on your mountain, the fewer animals, plants and trees we'll be able to harvest each year. Your taxes will go down accordingly. They may drop to nothing very quickly since you've emphasized that you wish to maintain the natural balance in your territory. Fine, Dame Verilyn sighed, we'll go with what Lady Zaradnik said. It won't all melt right away, though. Now that that's settled, the Baroness said, I need to return to the Draconic Kingdom. Nemel frowned at the odd tangent. Minor nobles usually didn't leave their territories, though she was under no illusion that the Baroness was an everyday minor noble. What are you doing in the Draconic Kingdom, my lady? Nemel asked. Helping with their beastman problem, Lady Zaradnik answered. I came back to make sure everything was in order with Dame Verilyn, but then I received orders from the Prime Minister to expand the Sorceress Kingdom west into the Abelian Wilderness. So you're running a huge territory, fighting in the Draconic Kingdom and expanding into the Abelian Wilderness at the same time? The woman was beyond human. If she had a legend, it wouldn't be some well-worn tale of adventure. She'd be a famous conqueror carving a vast empire out of exotic lands. It's not as difficult as you probably think, the Baroness smiled slightly. The elder liches of the administration are excellent, our soldiers here are accustomed to patrolling this wilderness, and expansion will only proceed as quickly as we can lay down new roads. Nearly all of my attention is focused on the Draconic Kingdom, aside from some paperwork. New roads, if you're building a road west, does that mean the Sorceress Kingdom is creating a new trade route with the Holy Kingdom of Roble? And everything in between. His Majesty recently resolved a crisis in the Holy Kingdom and we've forged favorable diplomatic ties as a result. The next step will be to establish regular trade. For the time being, our goods will have to go through Riestais, but, eventually, we'll be able to ship things there directly. It will be an excellent showcase of the Sorceress Kingdom's logistical capabilities. At the moment, it takes merchant caravans a month to travel between Erantal and Kalincha. The new route will see solely-to-drawn wagons arriving within half a day. Nemel's mind whirled at the implications. Lady Zaradnik gently rose into the air. Anyway, I need to head back now. Once you've settled down and gotten started, please do take a look around the territory and see how the local industries function. Lady Zaradnik flew across the river, quickly becoming a speck in the eastern sky. A white sail appeared from downriver. The ship with their supplies came ashore across the river and the undead crew started to unload their belongings. Fendros came closer, speaking in low tones. What she said just now. I know. What do you know? Dame Verilyn asked. This road we're standing on, Nemel answered. I don't know how long it will take, but it will become the highway between Wardensvale and Kalincha. We're sitting on a future major trade route. She had envisioned a long career marked by slow, steady progress. Now, they would have to recalculate everything. Or would they? There was nothing wrong with having a purely agrarian territory, but something inside Nemel just screamed at her to take advantage of the new development. You mean like the imperial highways? Yes, but it will be bigger than that. The goods we export will have access to a huge market that wasn't available to us before. Well, we don't even have to look that far. Wardensvale will grow quickly from the new trade route and we'll be supplying goods to the city that will be there eventually. Whoever was planning the Sorceress Kingdom's transportation network had an insane amount of foresight. Major infrastructure was popping up as if they had confidently predicted what would happen. Will you be all right now? Dame Verilyn asked. I haven't been back to my lair for months. Yes, Dame Verilyn, Nemel answered. Thank you. We have a lot of work ahead of us, so please don't expect villages and potato farms to pop up overnight. Dame Verilyn took wing, circling up the mountain on lazy wing beats. Their ship made its way across the river and grounded itself lightly on the gravel beach. Nemel and her friends got on with half of their settlers. The Death Warrior pushed off and its skeleton crew rowed back to the other side. Her leather boots sunk ankle-deep into the mud when she stepped off of the beach into the tangle of brush along the shore. A few meters away, Elise knelt and made a snowball the size of her head. She half-heartedly tossed it into the river, watching it float away. "It really is snow," she said. "What did you think it was?" Ida asked. I don't know. How is one side of the river covered in snow while it's nice and green on the other side?" "We work for a dragon," Fendros said. "I bet this isn't the last of the crazy things we'll see." They wandered around aimlessly over the shore before Nemel called everyone together. Her people looked at her expectantly. She couldn't figure out what to say. Settling a new land was always an intrepid venture in the tales, but the mountain of work awaiting them clogged her head. "I'll get a fire started, Mistress Nemel." The man who spoke was one of her rangers, Joel Baumer. Nemel smiled in thanks. "We need a place to set up our tents before nightfall," she said. "Let's put our supplies back in the boat for now to keep them dry. You can stay here with us, right?" She looked over to the Death Warrior, who nodded. The skeleton crew moved to put everything back on the ship. Nemel turned back to address her people. "Our rangers will spread out and look for a decent place to camp. Come back in 30 minutes and we'll pick out the best location from what you find." Taking up their longbows and axes, the rangers dispersed at her orders. She looked up and down the shore before addressing the woodcutters. "Let's start clearing out the brush along this stretch of shore. We need to build up a stockpile of firewood first. Once the rangers get back, we'll figure out the other things from there." The sound of snapping twigs and hatchets hewing through branches filled the air around them. Nemel got together with Fendros, Elise and Ida near the boat. "That was amazing," Elise grinned. "We instantly went from nothing to something." "I know, right?" Ida said excitedly. "We were all just like her. And then everything suddenly started taking shape." I just did what I thought was correct." Nemel looked down. "We camped during the promotional exam too, remember? This is a lot different than that, though. The Imperial Knights did most of the work and we just helped out where we could." "What do we do now?" Fendros asked. "Dame Verilyn said something about us only doing what we were supposed to do, if I recall correctly." "That doesn't leave much if we're nobles or bureaucrats," Ida said. "What are you talking about?" Nemel said. "We have plenty to do." Their blank stares caused Nemel to take a mental step backwards. "Out of curiosity, what did you learn growing up in your households?" "Reading, writing, etiquette, memorizing houses and their members," Fendros said. "When I got older, I learned about the political relationships relevant to our house." "Same here," Ida said. "Then there was the usual thing with fine arts and fashion. Navigating the local court and all of its functions was important, too. We all learned what was necessary for work as maids," Elise added. "Around 12 or 13, my mother started teaching me about men and how to please them." Now it was Nemel's turn to stare blankly at her friends. It wasn't proper to pry into someone's household affairs, so she didn't know anything about their upbringing. All she knew was that they felt like properly reared noble women who were trendy and socially adept. What they had listed was part and parcel of a noblewoman's education. Looking pretty, attending classy dinner parties and catching the eye of influential and wealthy noble houses was a common goal. A woman's joy was to be married, get pregnant, bear children and raise them. That was considered proper from a noble's point of view. Once they ensured that the success of Dame Verilyn's territory was well on its way, they could certainly use that education to attract partners if they felt like it. However, she didn't know why they had brought up those aspects of a noblewoman's education now, as most of it was utterly useless in their situation. "What about managing household affairs?" Nemel asked. "Overseeing a domain, managing tenants and balancing trade?" "We learned about that at the academy," Fendros said. "Your parents didn't teach you anything about that at all?" Her friends shook their heads. "My parents told me that the academy would teach me about that," Elise said. "They weren't wrong. But surely your parents would try and give you a head start on that?" They shook their heads again. Nemel's frown grew dire. Out of curiosity, Nemel asked, "How much time did your parents spend managing their titles?" "They left that to their vassals and retainers," Ida said. "Same here," Elise nodded. My parents mostly focused on maintaining ties with other houses. Mine worked to get ahead of the other houses in the region, Fenrose said. Retainers did most of the provincial work. Thank the gods for the Imperial Magic Academy. No wonder it was mandatory for nobles to attend. It appeared that Fenrose, Elise and Ida's parents ignored the fundamental aspects of being a territorial administrator. Delegating duties to retainers with relevant expertise was, of course, a normal part of managing a domain, but that didn't mean a noble house didn't need to educate its scions on such matters. Every house and its territory had a history and circumstances unique to itself. A noble house couldn't rely on the standard, generic education of the Imperial Magic Academy to cover that. It was up to the family to educate their daughters not only on their own affairs, but also on the territories and known circumstances of the prospective houses that they would marry into. The fact that their parents hadn't fully prepared their daughters for their future suggested all sorts of things. Not a single one of those things was good. Her friends' accounts shed a great deal of light on why their houses had been attainted in the first place. It also explained why their areas of expertise were so skewed towards politics and intrigue. "Nemel," Ida said, "you look like something just wiggled up your butt." "I thought everyone was raised like that," Fenrose frowned. "What was your childhood like?" "I studied magic like crazy," Nemel replied. "I did all the stuff you mentioned, too, but I also studied management, industry, economics and leadership. There was more history than I care to remember. There was plenty of fine arts, language and diplomacy." "Which imperial family are you from?" "I thought that was normal." Nemel grabbed her head in frustration. "Arg." It was a good thing that Dame Verilyn had flown home. Nemel didn't want to explain how she had fooled herself into thinking that her friends all had little Nemels inside of them waiting to be freed from repression. That they were competent young noblewomen who would flourish if offered a chance to prove themselves. "This can't stand," Nemel muttered. "What was that?" Fenrose asked. "This can't stand," Nemel shouted. "I'm retraining you all, House Grand style. From now on, you are all Imperial Arcanists." "What's that?" Nemel narrowed her eyes at Idaho. "Didn't you read Principles of Magocratic Governance?" "I sort of skimmed through it. It was insanely long." "We're not Imperials anymore, either," Elise added. "That doesn't matter," Nemel told them. "I refuse to have any nobles who aren't Imperial Arcanists working for me." "Ray," Elise cried, "Nemel's gone crazy." "Captain," Nemel ordered, "tie them up in sacks and ship them back to the Empire." The Death Warrior went over and started rummaging around the ship. "Wait," Fenrose said. "Wait. Don't sack us. We'll do it. I don't know what it is, but we'll do it." "Really?" Nemel peered at Fenrose suspiciously. Really? On either side of Fenrose, Elise and Ida nodded vigorously. "You get one chance," Nemel said. "Let's get started." "But what do we do?" Fenrose asked. Nemel's gaze slowly passed between the three desperate-looking women. They swallowed in fearful apprehension. "We study," Nemel told them. 24th day, Upper Wind Month, 1 CE. Studying was hard when one was cold, wet, and miserable. Additionally, it was not so much studying as it was trying to figure out what Fenrose, Elise and Ida's capabilities were. Nemel hadn't really thought about that while she discussed her plans for Dame Verilyn's domain. She had simply assumed that, since they were all noble scions who had gone through 2 years of the Imperial Magic Academy as she had, they would be in a similar situation in terms of management and administration. It didn't really help that they had gone along with everything she had spoken about without revealing any of the major flaws in their upbringing. Having Dame Verilyn around, who needed to have everything thoroughly explained to her, probably made it easier for them to play along. In the end, however, Nemel was angry with herself for failing to properly scrutinize them when she had months to do so. Lady Zaradnik said that there are some issues with them. Back when she had first introduced Nemel to Lady Shaltier, Dame Verilyn had said that of Fenrose, Elise and Idaho Nemel hadn't given the statement much thought after that. The fact that Lady Zaradnik had caught on to their charade not long after they had been introduced was awe-inspiring. Maybe it was the difference between a noble who ruled in her own right and a noble scion barely out of the academy. Nemel didn't know what they were thinking for all those months. Did they believe that they would be able to get away with it? Would they have continued to pretend that they knew what they were doing, praying that they would just be able to fake their way through life? Right up until the point that they drove Dame Verulin's territorial operations off of a cliff? Nemel couldn't wrap her head around how people could live like that. But it shouldn't be anything that can't be fixed. Lady Zaradnik had said that as well. At least Dame Verulin said that she had. She still wanted to believe that her 3 former classmates were products of their terrible upbringing. They were all terrified of what the future held when she encountered them in East Estate. Maybe that terror still gripped them even after being shown so much kindness. Maybe that kindness crushed them with guilt and the hole just got deeper and deeper, their mounting shame preventing them from confessing their situation. Then again, they did seem to remember a lot of what they learned at the Imperial Magic Academy. They were all good students. It was possible that they honestly didn't think they were that far off from Nemel. Ultimately, however, it was Nemel's screw-up and it was her responsibility to fix it. They were strong in certain aspects of their noble upbringing and their shortfalls weren't irredeemable. The fact that they were practicing wizards wasn't something that could be faked. All Nemel had to do was get them up to the same standard that House Gran demanded of its sons and daughters. After she was done being mad at them, she started to formulate a training plan. They had a lot of work to do with their new land, so Nemel couldn't afford to figure out what was necessary right away or stand around and lecture them on everything they needed to learn. For the time being, she had them organize the camp's inventories, which was similar to helping organize Zusharu's caravan inventories, and continue their respective magic studies. The rangers returned around noon and gathered around the fire to deliver their reports. Over half of them identified a rocky escarpment less than 100 meters deeper into the brush. "What we're standing on right now is actually wetland," one of them said. "There are bodies of water all along the valley floor. A few weeks ago, this entire place was probably underwater from the spring melt. If all this snow above us is going to melt away now, we'll probably see another flood." "How high is the escarpment?" 3 to 6 meters, depending on how far the rivers cut into the slope. "The top ain't flat, either, it gradually gets steeper." It sounded like they had come ashore in a bad location. Nemel scratched her temple, trying to figure out whether it was a good idea to set up their base camp yet. "Let's try this a different way," Nemel beckoned to Joel Baumer. "I'm going to send you up, Mr. Baumer." "You up, Mistress Nemel? I'll enchant you with a fly spell. Then you can fly up and down the river and survey things from above." Nemel cast the spell on the nervous ranger. His feet lifted off the ground uncertainly. "I can maintain this spell for 6 hours with a full mana reserve, so don't worry about dropping out of the sky. The spell has a set acceleration, so make sure you don't come down too quickly." Joel Baumer gingerly tested the enchantment for a few minutes before flying off to the east. Nemel returned her attention to the other rangers. "What's the land like here?" she asked. "It's nothing like the copses back in Gran Barony, that's for sure," one of them chuckled. "Everything's wild. Rangers and similar types will be able to get around, but this brush along the river is almost impassable to anyone else without using animal trails." "Did you see anything dangerous?" "Not yet. There are those animal trails I mentioned, but we haven't seen tracks from any big predators yet." "What about food and such? Can we survive here or will we need to keep resupplying from Warden's Vale?" "We can survive no problem out here. There's plenty of wildlife and there'll be plenty to forage once spring comes to the mountain. We just need a place where the river won't wash us away." "That's great," Nemel beamed. "In that case, we can dedicate most of our revenues to development." "How will our taxes work, Mistress Nemel?" "I'll be assuming full control of the settlement's resources for now," Nemel told them. "We need to focus everything on getting our base camp up and running before winter arrives. I don't think anyone wants to be sleeping in a tent during winter here if spring can be like this." Technically, that meant she had set the tax rate to 100%. With as little as they had, however, dividing their resources and labor in 34 different directions would get them nowhere quickly. "When will things become more normal-like?" someone asked. "Once we stabilize," Nemel answered. "This land is completely undeveloped, so even if I wanted to set up a normal tax scheme, I have no way to figure out what domain revenues will be like until we've sent goods to market for a season or two." She pulled out the notebook tucked under her arm, flipping it open to the 4th page. "Now that we have our land under our feet," Nemel said, "I'll go over our migration plan again. We have 3 waves coming in before winter. The first wave is, well, us. In addition to establishing a base camp, We'll be surveying the territory to figure out the optimal location for our main settlement. Once we've done that, the second group will come in, which will include the people needed to build the settlement and our farmers. Nemel hoped it wouldn't take long to reach that stage. She wanted some fields to test how various crops would do. Potatoes would be nice, but one never knew whether a land was suitable for growing any given thing. They also couldn't delay long if they wanted dry and warm homes to shelter in before winter. What's the third wave? More farmers, Nemel said. But, more importantly, women. Women? Yes, women. There are 30 of you right now and only 4 of us. That number will become even more lopsided when we bring in the next wave. The few spare women she found unmarried in the city didn't want to migrate. There were too many risks and unknowns. They all believed that the Empire was the best place in the world to live, despite the fact that they were struggling to make ends meet in the cities. Not only that, they were brought up in a culture where men took risks and women were usually seen as something to be protected. Even the women in question saw themselves that way. Nemel could empathize with certain aspects of their position, as it was grounded in the realities that came with human existence. All else being equal, the average man was bigger and stronger than the average woman. A man could have children with many women at the same time, but not the other way around. If a human settlement lost many of its members, it would repopulate faster if it lost men rather than women. Thus, men were expected to face danger. The vast majority of the imperial army was made up of men. When new lands were claimed, the first settlers were always men. Taking risks and seizing success was one of the foremost measures of a man's worth in the eyes of society. Women, on the other hand, were kept safe, preferably out of reach of everything that saw humans as food or competition. This idea dictated what women were expected to do, neatly packaged in their cultural norms. Generally speaking, jobs that kept women out of danger were seen as proper. One could be a tailor, clerk, chef or some kind of entertainer. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and engineers were also fine so long as they worked in settlements. Magical researchers, temple staff and arcane artisans were in high demand. Unlike men, women weren't pushed into taking bold action to validate their existence. For those possessed of rare talent and ambition, the attitudes that evolved from such a culture were often chafing. For the vast majority, however, it was a highly favorable situation. If one could pursue a reasonably prosperous life in peace and safety, why do anything else? Before coming to Warden's Vale, Nemel herself had chosen a career that offered a degree of freedom and relative safety while also offering all sorts of cushy benefits. She couldn't expect others to not do the same. The few women who strayed from the beaten path and achieved spectacular success were not seen as role models for everyone else. They weren't even seen as women, they were icons far beyond the reach of regular people, celebrities so long as they did not otherwise act beyond the boundaries laid by societal norms. If they did, they became a threat and their influence was suppressed whenever possible. It was far easier to aspire to mediocrity than it was to greatness, so that suppression usually worked. The average person could not become a powerful adventurer or fourth-tier caster just by wishing so, after all. Going off of the beaten path would get one beaten into submission by the world itself. To get women to migrate, she had to make her territory seem close enough to the beaten path that the image of her territory would start to attract them. This was more difficult than it should have been, as the sorceress kingdom was seen as a dangerous place filled with the undead. Nemel's neighbors were demi-humans and an evil dragon would be their liege. Fortunately, the expectations that society placed on men worked in Nemel's favor. So long as she kept them focused on their goals and they saw themselves making tangible progress, her band of intrepid pioneers would cooperate. For her men to attract wives and start families, they had to be seen as successful. Not only did they need titles and licenses, but they also needed decent homes in settlements with everything an imperial citizen was accustomed to having. Additionally, her father always said that men needed many things that would only be considered nice to have as a woman. They needed a sense of pride and accomplishment in something real, they needed something to protect, and they needed someone to love. Without those things, men were merely caricatures filled with shallow values and empty lives. When looking at things from that perspective, what had to be done became remarkably clear. She would create a place where people did not merely exist from day to day, but one where her people and the generations that came after them could truly live. The Imperial Magic Academy didn't teach anything like that. To the Empire, Being a noble was a purely administrative role, revolving around numbers and models for what the central bureaucracy considered a functional territory. Even things like public sentiment and satisfaction became numbers plugged into sterile formulas dictated by a faceless body of experts in the ministries. Nemel didn't like that at all. Since it was entirely up to her, she would run Dame Verulin's territory according to the values of House Gran. Joel Baumer returned from his flight, landing far more slowly than he had to. Nemel dispelled the fly spell. "Report," she said. "Yes, Mistress Nemel," the ranger bobbed his head. "There's a great spot about 4 kilometers upriver. It's just above where the other river joins this one. The escarpment there is only a half-dozen meters or so from the shore." "That sounds great, Mr. Baumer," Nemel smiled. "Can the boat go up that other river?" "A little. The other river falls over the escarpment about a kilometer from the site I mentioned." That was more than good enough. Since the territory was on a major waterway, building a pier for the village was a given. She informed the Death Warrior captain of the new location and instructed her people to head over and begin clearing the site. As for Fenrose and the others, "We're going to Warden's Vale," Nemel told them. "We are?" Fenrose blinked. "If we fly straight over this ridge," Nemel said, "it should only take about 30 minutes to get there. It'll take these guys 2 hours to muck their way over to the new site. We'll take a look around while they do that." Nemel cast Flournida and herself. Fenrose cast the spell on herself and Elise. They went straight north over the ridge that the Katza River flowed around. Near the top of that ridge, a voice popped up in Nemel's head. "Unidentified flyer, this is Royal Army Air Patrol 56. You are ordered to halt and submit yourselves for inspection." A pair of elder liches descended upon them. Fenrose and the others floated closer to Nemel as one of the undead mages produced a black clipboard. The sound of its pen scratching over paper carried over the cold winds. "Identify yourself," it said. "Nemel Gran," she replied. "I'm Dame Verulin's new seneschal." "What is your destination?" "Warden's Vale." The scratching of the pen resumed. After a moment, the elder lich looked up again. "Do you have proof of your identity?" No. "Summon Undead V." A startled cry rose from Ido as the 2 elder liches summoned 8 wraiths, which immediately surrounded them. One of the elder liches flew behind. "You will come with us," the one in front of them said. A member of the Imperial Air Patrol being taken in by the Royal Army Air Patrol. The grim procession descended northwards, skimming low over the Katza River. 15 minutes later, they arrived at the army base. 2 Death Knights came to stand on either side of them. They were brought to a grey granite office with severe-looking furniture. "You will wait here," one of the elder liches said. The undead left the room. Nemel seated herself on a plain wooden chair. "Are we in trouble?" Fenrose asked. "But we didn't do anything wrong." Ida wrung her hands nervously. "Maybe we need permission to fly around in the Sorceress Kingdom," Fenrose said. But Dame Verulin was flying around. "Dame Verulin is a knight. We're pretty much commoners. There's a huge difference." Several minutes later, an elder lich appeared in the company of 2 other elder liches. The newcomer looked a bit familiar. Its crimson gaze moved back and forth before settling on Nemel. "Visually, they appear to be who they say they are," it said. "Is there any possibility of deception?" one of the other elder liches asked. "It is not impossible." The first elder lich pointed a bony finger at Nemel. "You will be subjected to mind control magic," it said. "Do not resist." "Eh? What?" "Mind con. Charm person." Nemel squeaked and shielded herself with her arms as the spell washed over her. "The subject has resisted the spell. Escalation is advised." 2 Death Knights stomped into the room. Wicked blades brandished. Wait. Do it again. You did it so suddenly that I just reacted." The Death Knights looked at the elder lich. A dry sigh issued from the undead caster's throat, and it pointed its finger at her again. "Charm person." Nemel blinked and looked over at the elder lich. She rose from her seat and threw her arms around its bony frame. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to cause you so much trouble." The sound of a scratching pen rose to her side. Nemel released the elder lich, looking at the other with a frown. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Why are you writing up my friend? What did she do to you, huh? What is your name?" "Look here, you." Answer the question, her friend said. Nemel Gran. What is your quest? Nemel narrowed her eyes. She looked at her friend, who nodded slightly. A trip to Warden's Vale, Nemel answered. What is your favorite color? Lavender. The elder leech's pen stopped. It turned its head to nod at her friend. You are free to go about your business, it said. Have a pleasant day. The army liches and their death knights left the room. Nemel turned to smile at her friend. Say, she said, I'm new here. Since we're friends now, would you like to go out with me and... Nemel froze as the charm person spell was dispelled. She tried to see what Fendros and the others' faces looked like out of the corner of her eye. I think we saw a side of Nemel that we weren't supposed to see, Elise said. Nemel Gran, the elder lich said. You and your aides will come with me. Nemel resisted the urge to cover her face in her hands as they filed out of the building after the elder lich. She picked up her steps to walk alongside it, trying to ignore the gazes of the other women. You're the one Lady Zaradnik introduced to us at the harbor, she said. Nonna, right? Correct. Why did they ask me for my favorite color? That is confidential. About what I was going to ask? No. She sighed and fell back to walk with the others. They boarded a wagon parked not far from the office. When they reached the intersection leading to the harbor, the wagon turned left towards a cluster of stone buildings arranged around a bare stone plaza. Are these all houses? Elise gaped. They're huge. Ida stared. Nemel nodded in silent agreement. They were huge. Even the smallest one was about as large as a minor noble's provincial manor. The shop houses were 3 or 4 times as large. Furthermore, they were all fashioned from granite. A few men and women moved around the plaza. Most of the residents were probably working. A bell tolled from the spire of a long structure at the northern end of the plaza. Its door opened and disgorged dozens of children. A school? Fendros murmured, I wonder if all the kids here attend. Truancy is prohibited, Nonna said. Violators are returned to the institute by army patrols. Is it a school, or a prison? The wagon stopped at a house with a small jungle inside. Nonna led them into a small office to the side of a hall filled with plants. What is this place? Nemel asked. The temporary office of Baroness Saradnik, Nonna answered. I assume that you have arrived for orientation? Yes, that's right. Nonna went over to a shelf, pulling out several volumes. The elder lich placed it on a nearby desk. The first red tome contains a summary of the public laws of the Sorceress Kingdom as of the 1st of spring. A summary of the Sorceress Kingdom's civil laws is contained in the second red tome. The green tome contains the bylaws of the territories under House Saradnik's management, including those of the Special Administrative Zone. The black tome contains the military regulations of the Royal Army. As administrative aides, it is your duty to familiarize yourselves with all of them. Do you have a crate for those? The elder lich produced a map of Lady Zaradnik's territory, as well as a directory for local industries. A death knight appeared with a crate and packed their things away. On their way out, they ran into a walking plant. The other kids want to do weapons testing again, hello? Nemel stared at the humanoid figure. She was actually quite beautiful. Almost any noblewoman would be put to shame by comparison. Are you a dryad? Ida asked. Yeah, the dryad answered. Oh. The dryad dipped into a curtsy. It was rough and awkward looking, as if she were unaccustomed to the movement. Dame Glazagel Gronvid, the dryad said. It's a pleasure to meet you. First a dragon knight, now a dryad knight. I guess the latter shouldn't be as shocking as the former. Contrary to their attractive appearance, Nemel was taught that dryads were extremely dangerous. Any reports delivered to the Imperial Army concerning them had to do with attacks against frontiersmen and even army patrols. As heteramorphs, they were far stronger than most demi-humans. They also had an array of powerful spell-like abilities, and the strongest ones were often druids. They took turns introducing themselves to the dryad knight. Dame Gronvid put her things away somewhere in the tangle of plants in the hall before returning to them. So you work for Dame Verilyn, huh? Yes, that's right. We just dropped off our people in her territory and we came by to look around Warden's Vale. Actually, if you're not busy, we would love it if you could show us around. I guess I have a few hours, Dame Gronvid said. Just a minute. The dryad went past the hall and up a flight of stairs. After a few minutes, she came back down and led them back outside. On the street, there was a gaggle of kids waiting with expectant looks. They said to meet outside the forge again, Dame Gronvid told them. Nemel watched the children disperse around the plaza. Having so many gathered like that was fairly rare in the Empire. Past the age of 6 or 7, most would be apprenticing under their parents and busy with work. Did you say something about weapons testing just now? Nemel asked. Yeah. With the league battles postponed, most of my classmates are trying to improve the stuff that they craft for matches. Anyway, where do you want to go first? Could you introduce us to all of the businesses here? Sure. Dame Gronvid made her way across the plaza, her golden red leaves rustling in the wind. Despite looking like an elf or a human, she didn't walk like one. It almost seemed like she was attached to the ground as she stepped forward. The familiar tread of a death knight sounded from behind them. Nemel looked over her shoulder to find one of the powerful undead warriors following them with a potted tree in its arms. Is that your tree? Yeah. I didn't know dryads could pot their trees, Nemel said. Me neither, Dame Gronvid replied. It was already like that when I was born. Like dragons, dryads appeared to be a race born knowing things. Are you going to plant your tree someday? Nemel asked. Not for a while, Dame Gronvid answered. Dryads can't go very far from their trees. I have to finish school and all of my other studies first. If you don't mind my asking, Dame Gronvid, how old are you? 6 months or so. Heteromorphs were unfair. In the time when Nemel would still be unable to talk or walk properly, Dame Gronvid was going to school, had been granted a knighthood, was probably much stronger than Nemel was now, and had an amazing figure that Nemel could only wish for. They went along a row of shops, stopping to introduce themselves to each of the proprietors. Everyone was polite and friendly, answering their questions in good humor. Along the way, however, they discovered several alarming things. The first was that the prices quoted for timber were extraordinarily low. Since they were in a heavily forested frontier region, she did expect depressed prices relative to what one might find in the cities, but what she found in Warden's Vale was beyond that. Secondly was that everything generally felt off. At least compared to the Empire. Essentials were cheap and plentiful. What a frontier territory would consider luxury items were also readily available. The problem was that they were items that not only shouldn't have been there, but should have been expensive enough for no one to be able to afford. Yet, people came and bought them. It was all she could do to keep her jaw from dropping open when a lone little girl came by on an errand, casually placing enough gold on the counter to support a common household for 2 years. She knew exactly what the magic item was and how to use it, too. Nemel was thoroughly confused by the time they started heading over to the wagon lot to go home. They could save on mana by riding over to where their new camp lay across Dame Gronvid, she said. Do you know how much the average tenant household here makes? No, the dryad shook her head. Do you have any tenants or incomes? Unless you count worms and insects, I don't have any tenants in my pot. I do make some money as a druid, though. How much does it cost for divine magic here? 2 copper coins for an Orizon or first-tier spell. I can make a few silver coins a day, but that depends on what's going on. Druids weren't like priests and clerics, who worked for temples that had various operational expenses to take care of. Dame Gronvid was probably the highest-earning 6-month-old in the entire world. That people could afford double the rate of divine magic in more developed lands meant that they were relatively affluent as well. Are the taxes really low here? Nemel asked. I'm not sure if it's low or not, but I think there's a 90% tax rate here. Nemel's mouth fell open. Warden's Vale was well past the point where anyone should expect to give up 90% of their production. How does anyone pay for anything here? They'd have to produce an awful lot to afford 90% tax. I haven't heard anyone complain about it. Everyone looks happy here. That much was true. Baroness Saradnik's subjects all looked motivated and generally content with their lives. If it was the Empire, a 90% tax rate would starve everyone to death. They parted ways with Dame Gronvid, directing the wagon south out of the city. What they discovered in Warden's Vale and the implications that it carried were not lost on Fenrose, Elise, and Idaho. What are we going to do? Ida asked. Timber is crazy cheap here. The price of meat is high, though, Elise noted. Our rangers should be able to bring in decent revenues. Is it really that bad? Fenrose mused. The rangers said we should be able to easily sustain ourselves. Essential goods are cheap, so our exports should manage well enough. She had a point. They wouldn't be able to afford any luxuries, but their basic needs were covered. Achieving the same quality of life as the residents of Warden's Vale, however, felt like an insurmountable wall. Nemel dug through the crate of administrative materials provided by Nonna, looking for clues as to how they could match whatever the other people in the territory were doing. In addition to the legal references, the Elder Lich had included almanacs and manuals. It didn't take long to figure out what they were missing. "It's the undead," she said. "They're using undead labor." As silly as it seemed, she had forgotten all about it. The Sorceress Kingdom was well known in the Empire for its utilization of undead labor. They even made efforts to market it abroad. Despite this, Nemel never assumed that undead labor would be used in her new territory for some reason. "Are we really going to use it?" Ida asked. "I don't know." Up to this point, the fact that the Sorceress Kingdom used undead security and labor was seen as something that couldn't be helped. This, however, did not mean that her people would so readily embrace it.